Well, first of all, welcome and thank you for being willing to do this. For those that don't know, Anthony is a physician that is also an advocate of a carnivore diet. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're up in the Pacific Northwest still. Maybe not. I don't know if you moved since then or where are you located. I'll tell you what, Anthony, why don't you go ahead and just give us your introduction so I don't botch it, man. How's that? I'm a little lightheaded. I just got done lifting a 200-pound ball a bunch of times just so my brain isn't quite checked back in yet, maybe. Move that green screen out of the way.
I'm from Pacific Northwest. I grew up in California, in Seattle, and I last year I moved down to Perth, Australia. So I've actually been sort of specializing in neurosurgery down here. So
okay. So you're back in Perth. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Because I know you talked about going back and forth, and I know you've done some interesting mission work and all that stuff. Why don't we just kind of go through some of those things real quick? I know you played some time in high-level rugby because you and I shared kind of that in the past. I know I've interviewed you on HBO. Gosh, it's been maybe almost 2 years, I bet, or a year and a half at least.
Yeah.
Good to see you're still plugging away and doing things, and carnivore still at least part of your repertoire. Tell me a little bit more about the athletic background, what's propelled you to go into medicine, where you've been, and that sort of stuff. And then we can sort of go into some questions that people might have and some of the thoughts you might have, if that's okay.
Yeah. And thanks for having me back. Yeah, it's great to see you again, and glad you're doing well as well. So I've always wanted to be a doctor ever since I was a kid. I've always just been very interested in the body and how people worked, and I always wanted to know more about that. So I was always interested since I was a kid. I played sports, at a high level since I was very young. I just got very lucky that where I grew up in Kirkland, Washington, was 2 miles away from one of the best MMA centers in the world. AMC Kickboxing with Matt Hume. He's a very, very prominent fighter and trainer, and I was lucky enough to be with him since I was 14. And so I did that for a number of years and really loved it. And then I got into rugby, and that sort of professional training style that I got at AMC, where I was with the professionals, I was there every hour that place was open, every day it was open, that translated into rugby. So I put that full sort of, attention into rugby. And so I picked it up quite quickly. I was an All-American when I was 18. And traveled to New Zealand with the U19 national team, which was a fantastic experience. And I was a little ahead of the game with school. I started university when I was 15 at University of Washington, and so I figured that was a few years ahead of the game, so I could afford to take some time off before medical school and just pursue rugby. I ended up taking a number of years off and played in America and in the Super League, in the Canadian Premiership in Vancouver, and then in the Champions League in England. And then ultimately decided to go to medical school at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland and continued playing rugby there. My coach down in New Zealand was a guy, Tony Smith, who was the head coach at Trinity College in Dublin. And when I was over there visiting him, I just really liked it, and I liked the people there. And so I decided to when it was time to go to medical school, I decided to go back there. And so I kind of got into the whole carnivore thing without realizing it at that stage in my undergraduate degree. I took cancer biology, and we learned, day one that, how plants defend themselves is by being poisonous. And so we were learning from a cancer perspective. So we learned all the different toxins and carcinogens that were in plants. And then we learned, Brussels sprouts had 136 known human carcinogens. Mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, kale, lettuce, broccoli, celery, cabbage, cucumbers, all these things. Every plant that, I'd ever eaten, we were given lists with 60, 80, over 100 known human carcinogens. And they're quite abundant. We know this from the 1980s, that there was far more naturally occurring toxins in vegetables like spinach than in the pesticides we spray on them, and they were much more harmful. So we were learning this, and we were quite blown away. And so I just stopped eating plants at that point. And I didn't recognize that as being, such a major impact. I stopped drinking alcohol at the same time as well. And I just felt amazing. And so I thought, okay, I'm just not going to drink at all. I was already doing the diet, without realizing it. And then I stopped drinking. I attributed everything to that. But, years went by, I kind of slipped off the diet without realizing it, but I still wasn't drinking during the rugby season, and I wasn't performing as well. And I wasn't playing as well. I didn't feel as amazing. I remember being in England, and I remember thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as just unbelievably amazing as I normally do? Am I just not working as hard? What's going on? I'm not drinking. So what's happening? I couldn't figure it out. And then I came across your podcast on Joe Rogan. My brother put me onto it, and I was like, that was it. That was the difference. I slipped off that. I was eating as a carnivore without even realizing it, and then I slipped off of it, and that was the difference. That was the difference in my all my performance and my health. And so I stopped completely, just cold. Since then, that was right when I got back from Bangladesh in February 2018, and I haven't eaten a plant since. Certainly not willingly, anyway. I slip one in mischievously into like a seasoning or something like that, but it's definitely not by choice.
Do you, and I know you mentioned Bangladesh because I know you've done some kind of missionary work there. Can you
Yeah.
mention that a little bit?
Yeah. So in 2017, there was like a full-on mass genocide in Burma. The Burmese government killed, the unofficial numbers are about 200,000 people in a month and a half. And about 1 million people fled from Burma into now Myanmar into Bangladesh to escape this. So I was taking some time off from practice to help with some family issues, and a friend of mine who worked for a foundation called Direct Relief, who was helping out in this situation, called me and knew that I was taking some time off and I had some more time on my hands, and told me about what was going on, and said that there wasn't as big of a response because for a lot of reasons, one of which was that Bangladesh is extremely dangerous, and they support ISIS, who was very active at the time and were actively targeting and killing foreigners, but even local non-Muslims, but especially Americans. So they blew up a hotel because there was one American staying there. They blew up restaurants and cafes and were executing people who couldn't recite the Quran in Arabic and so forth. So people weren't going for very justifiable reasons, but I felt that was all the more reason to go because no one else was going. I didn't ever really feel the tug to go to like Haiti or Nepal when they had their issues because everyone was going. And so it was like, well, they don't need me. I'll just get in the way and take up resources that someone else could use. But this was something that was different. People weren't going. And I knew that it was dangerous. And I knew that there was a chance that I could die. But at the same time, I knew that everybody that I would see and that I would help wouldn't get helped otherwise. And so I kind of just did the math, and I really couldn't justify not going. So I went, and it was exactly what I imagined it to be. But at the same time, it was very fun and entertaining at the same time. The people that I met there, the situations that you kind of had to deal with were very extreme, but you found the little joys because you had to. You go crazy otherwise. You have 200 people lining up down the outside of this tent. It was like really like MASH unit tents in this refugee camp, and you couldn't treat them all, but you did your best and you tried to. And so hundreds of people would be kind of told, we can't see you today every day, but at the same time, I was able to see dozens of people every day. So I think that was definitely a big win. And I was able to continue helping the charity I was there with, which was called the Hope for Bangladesh. The Hope for the Women and Children of Bangladesh is the full name, but they do sort of OBGYN care, and they've started a midwife program around Bangladesh, which has been very helpful to the local communities. And I was doing more of a sort of an emergency trauma sort of position, and then they asked me to step into an administrative role and run the field hospitals and clinics that they were establishing there in the camps, which I agreed to, even though it wasn't really where I wanted to be. It was very, very difficult. It was a very intense experience, but I didn't think that I could say no. So, I said yes, but I had to be back in February. And so I had a hard date. I had to be back in February. So I came back in February and I said, okay, well, I can come back, at the end of the month sort of thing, which was the plan. But the plan, I said, okay, I'm not going to come back until, the field hospital is basically, imminently going to be built, because there was delays and delays and delays. If I'm coming back to specifically run this field hospital, I want the field hospital to be, built, instead of, kind of sitting there and not really doing what I'm there supposed to be doing. But there were more delays, and the monsoon season hit, and the government military was building roads in the area. So we actually had to stop construction for probably about 6 or 8 months. And so it didn't end up getting completed until October 2018. At that point, I was already committed to coming to Australia. So I didn't end up going back, but I have continued to try to help remotely since then.
Yeah, well, I had experience a couple of times. Once I went down to Peru, in a place called Ica, and we took care of just a bunch of little kids, and we were doing pediatric orthopedic deformity corrections and stuff like that. And we announced they announced it in advance, and we expected to get 150 people per day, and we got 500 people a day show up, and there's no way we could process and handle them all. We did the best we could. And then same thing in Afghanistan. We were just, we would treat the war casualties, but we also tried to do humanitarian care while we were there. And I mean, there were people literally would walk 100 miles to get care. I mean, they would literally walk until their shoes fell off, and we had to, give them new shoes and food and clothing, and then try to treat them. So it's really amazing how much lack there is of healthcare in much of the developing world. I mean, it's really a tragedy. Although what we have here in the United States, has become disease management, disease maintenance, and so there's kind of this, what is the right amount, and what's actually helpful, what's not. So talk to me a little bit. So you said you're in Perth, Australia. So I assume are you doing a neurosurgery residency right now? Is that what's going on? Is that what you're doing? Or what is going on with that?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a slightly different system here. Like, you can be a doctor for a number of years, but not technically on a training program. So you can actually work as a neurosurgeon, be a non-accredited position. So I just got here sort of in the past year, so I'm still sort of navigating the system and looking at completing a training residency course here, or finishing up back in the States. So I'm working as a neurosurgeon resident. It's called a registrar here, but not technically on the training program. So that, and then also I do work with sort of volunteer at the moment, but once I get my sort of general registration that comes through, I'll start working for a sort of functional medicine endocrinology clinic that deals with bariatric medicine and functional lifestyle changes, and trying to find how to optimize people's lives and health, so they don't have to be on a whole bunch of medications going forward and get surgeries in the future. And I met the doctor that ran this clinic, and just talked to him about carnivore diet and the different sorts of research that I've been doing, and the different sorts of discoveries that I made. And he was quite interested in that, because he does a lot with diet and so forth, and putting people on specific diets to help them lose weight and help them get healthier. And so he's very interested in that. We talked more and more about it. And he's actually now promoting a carnivore diet to all of his patients that will sort of listen. It's not palatable to some people. They hear this and they kind of pull back a bit, but a lot of people have been very, very receptive. Most people have been very, very receptive. And he's getting quite a lot of good results. We are. So I go in on my days off. If I'll work a call shift, I'll work overnight. I technically have the next day off. And so I'll work the whole night, and then I'll basically go to this clinic during the day, and then on the weekends and things like that. And so I've been sort of burning the candle at both ends, but I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed being able to be in the clinic and talk to people about how to, make their lives better, before there's a train crash, and picking up the pieces. So I've quite enjoyed that as well.
So, and you said, you've seen some discoveries or some research. Can you talk a little bit more? What are you finding with people? And you say some people are receptive. It's obviously we have people that are receptive because we have an audience here that do this, but it's in general, I think there's still quite a bit of resistance in the general population from just considering it. Not that they would even do it, but just to consider it as a viable option is still a big hill to climb. And I think, so I'd like to hear a little bit more about what you're finding, what discoveries, what things are getting better. If you find some different mechanistic data, and, I talk a lot about, gut permeability. I talk a lot about, nutrition quality, and then often, the sort of benefits of glucose stability. So what are you finding?
So as far as talking to people about it, they can be quite receptive, but it's all about the approach and how you mentioned these things. So I've kind of honed my arguments as to how to bring it up, how to broach the subject, how to do that in a fashion that people are going to be like, okay, that does make sense. It's interesting. I don't really know what I think about it, but you caught my attention. And as far as all the different sorts of benefits of the carnivore diet, we can I think the details are very interesting, about how the biochemistry of your body changes based on what you eat, especially carbohydrates and so forth. But as the more I've been looking at medicine from a carnivore perspective, the more I realize that these so-called chronic diseases that we treat are not diseases per se, but they're toxicities, toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet and a lack of appropriate species nutrition. So when you look at it from that standpoint, things really do start to make sense. And so you look at we have the Romans, they had lead pipes. They all had lead poisoning for generations. They thought this was normal. This was normal aging. This is normally how your body works. And it's like, oh, it's normal for your hair to bleed. It's like, no, that's not normal. But they didn't know that. That was normal for them. So now we're living in that time where we think this is normal. We see how people age. We see how they die, and that's normal to us. But we don't remember that 40 years ago, that wasn't normal. And so, you look at diabetes, that's not a disease. That's, glucose toxicity, right? Or, and so that's, carbohydrate toxicity, sugar toxicity, all these sorts of things are toxicities. And you can manufacture drugs to, mitigate the response in your cell and in your body and have you die slowly over 40 years. Or you can remove the toxin, you can remove the poison, your body just gets on with it. So I've been trying to use the carnivore diet as a treatment modality to basically remove the lead, remove these causative agents, and benefit people's lives. So we've been doing that in the clinic here, and had excellent results. Everyone who's actually been able to stay on it for a couple of weeks and continue on it, and they all are talking about how much benefit they're getting from it. I'm working with a group in Seattle to try to set up a treatment program for end-stage Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. There's tons of data and showing now that high saturated fat diet, higher LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, is neuroprotective. You have lower rates of Alzheimer's, lower rates of Parkinson's and dementia. And that high fat ketogenic diet has been shown to be more efficacious in the treatment of Alzheimer's than any drug ever trialed. So we already had evidence that this works and this helps people. So why don't we do this as a treatment? We don't need to we can do a controlled trial. That's fine. But we've done that. We have this data. So why don't we just treat people with it and see how it goes? And so we're trying to set that up now. I have a friend of mine that actually grew up playing rugby with. He runs sort of a hospice system in Seattle. And a lot of what they do is treat these end-stage Alzheimer's, Parkinson's people that come to their facility basically to live out their last days. They generally last about a year and a half. And so we're looking to get them on these treatment and see if we can actually reverse this and maybe get them home. And I think that would be quite remarkable. and groundbreaking. I think that, you know, I think that honestly, these things aren't diseases. There's no doubt in my mind. You look at them chemically, physiologically, these things are toxicities or malnutrition, lack of fat, lack of meat, so forth. And I think the person that proves that these diseases are not diseases, but these are toxicities and malnutrition, I think that guy's gonna, you know, win the Nobel Prize in medicine, deserve to, or woman, whomever. But I think that is something that should revolutionize medicine. I think, you know, for the entire history of medicine, you know, we've treated, you know, pregnancy and childbirth, you know, accidents, infectious disease, and congenital genetic problems, right? And then toxicities. Now it's all chronic disease. That's all we're treating. Why didn't those exist before? Oh, well, they probably just didn't notice it. That is, the hubris of that statement is insane. You just think that anyone who came before you is not intelligent enough to notice what's in front of their face. You know, it's just, the world just popped into existence after 1986. You know, they're not realizing that, you know, atherosclerosis was first described in, I think it was like 1928 or something like that. Well, it was probably there, but they probably didn't notice it. It's like, no, we've been doing dissections very carefully for hundreds of years. You know, you made your name by finding something new and publishing it. Someone would have seen that, you know, but this is new. We don't realize this is new. And so this is something different. And I think that getting back to that, where we get rid of these sorts of toxicities and malnutrition sort of states, we'll get back to treating those normal 5 things in medicine. I think that will change everything. You know, Dr. Lustig from UCSF pointed out a statistic that in America, we spend $2.4 trillion a year just treating the effects of sugar consumption. And the sugar industry makes $1.3 trillion a year just in America. So this is what, you know, nearly $4 trillion that are being sort of taken out of our society and community and economy, just to go around in a circle, to cause a disease and then treat a disease. You know, that's your healthcare crisis. You know, we're spending trillions of dollars on something that doesn't need to exist. And, you know, he also said there's like 9% of Americans are type 2 diabetic, and they account for 75% of the Medicare and Medicaid expenditures. And now if you realize that 40% of Americans are pre-diabetic, ostensibly in 10 years, if they don't change what they're doing, you're going to have 50% of the population as a type 2 diabetic. What's that going to do to the budget? You know, it's going to destroy it. So we can go one of 2 ways. We can completely solve this issue, or we can you know, destroy it further. So I think my aim is to, you know, do the study, set things up in motion in neurosurgery, or anything, because it applies to everything, and show that this can help treat, you know, brain tumors. This can help treat autoimmune disorders. This can help treat heart disease, diabetes, and so forth, and start using that as a treatment modality, and showing that this actually works.
Yeah, just to kind of continue this conversation on sort of diabetes or insulin resistance, you mentioned, you know, sugar consumption as being the, you know, the toxicity. There's a lot of different thoughts on this these days. Some people will say it's lipid deposition within ectopic tissues like, you know, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, intracellular lipids, pancreatic lipids. These things come from saturated fat in the blood, things like palmitic acid. Dr. Lustig himself recently said that eating quote unquote corn-fed beef will cause insulin resistance via branched chain aminoacidemia. And I don't know where he came up with that statement. Looking at the literature, there's no such study that compares grass-fed versus grain-finished beef on insulin resistance as it relates to branched chain aminoacidemia. At least I've yet to see it, and I look at the literature on that. So, I mean, you know, you've got people that are clearly saying, and we do see clear evidence that diacylglycerides, ceramides, and some of these other depositions that occur in these tissues do seem to interfere with insulin signaling. And then there's some thought about mitochondrial overload. Can it be just energy overload? Can we talk about, you know, eating too much sugar is going to kind of drive up ectopic fat deposition through energy. What about eating too much fat? Is that possible?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. So when you eat carbohydrates, you change your hormonal signaling pathway to make your brain think that you're starving to death. So you eat more, and you will force in more energy. People ask me, it's like, well, if you eat too much fat, well, then too much fat is bad, because we hear this, things get bandied around and repeated so many times. They just take it as written. But there, a lot of these things are wrong. I keep looking at these things in medicine. There's something that's been just been repeated so many times, and then people just believe it's in textbooks now, but it's wrong. So a lot of these things are in that category, unfortunately. As far as eating too much fat, it's physiologically impossible to eat too much fat. You cannot do it. You cannot absorb fat without bile. Bile is secreted from your liver, stored in your gallbladder. You don't make more bile in response to the fat that you eat. You make a set amount. Your body makes this much bile because it wants this much fat. And once you get rid of that, once you eat that much fat, it just goes out. You cannot overeat fat. You can eat an entire bucket of lard and you'll absorb as much as you have bile for, and the rest will just go out, sometimes dramatically if you eat too much. But it
What,
doesn't, sorry, go
what,
on.
I'm just wondering what studies you have to support that statement, because I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you can't eat too much fat. And
Well,
I think our capacity to absorb fat increases. I think over time we do that. And I think, people that, I mean, I can tell you right now, I cut back fat and I'm leaning out like crazy. I mean, it's, not because I was under eating fat that I'm doing this.
yeah.
So I mean, I think, again, I do think that fat is satiating. I do think protein is satiating. I think that you can eat too much. We have people in the audience that are still overweight, that are still obese,
Mm-hmm.
that are eating lots and lots of fat. And
Mm-hmm.
why are they still obese? I mean,
So
that's my question. What do you think is going on there?
well,
Are not
yeah.
exercising enough?
So yeah, no, that's fair. Like, I mean, not everyone's made exactly the same. So some people can have issues that's that compound that, with Dr. Ransberg here, he talks about different sorts of hummingbird versus polar bear sort of metabolism in your bodies are just going to you can have people that they're just going to be skinny, it doesn't matter what they eat, and their body's just going to burn through it, and other people, they eat quite sensibly, and that doesn't happen. So there are genetic differences. I've never seen anything, and I've looked, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I've never seen anything that shows that we make more bile in response to fat.
Why wouldn't
Everything
we?
that
Why wouldn't
Sorry?
we? Why wouldn't we
No, I
upregulate?
don't know, but I don't know. But I've never seen anything one way or the other, and so that's the thing. You'll see things that do talk about rates of bile secretion, but they generally talk about it in quite
In
sort
what,
of.
but in the context of which diet, I mean, if these things are looked at, what diet are they
I
on
think
a
that's
baseline,
fair.
and what's the chronicity of that? So I think I mean, not that I don't promote a high fat diet for many people. I just think we make these blanket, never, all the time, no limit type things. It kind
Mhm.
of gets a little bit concerning to me. What about, so protein? Let's talk about the protein. Can you eat too much protein?
Yeah, well, I mean, to your point, I'm sure you can overeat anything, can't you? And it's certainly in the context of eating, carbohydrates and things like that, your body's going to, take in more energy than it actually wants. Protein, I haven't looked too much into it as far as a proportion of calories and so forth, but I think there was a gentleman on your show last year that just mentioned anecdotally that if you get more than a certain percentage of your calories from protein, they can actually be quite harmful to you. I've never seen studies that specifically said that. However, I do know people that have a high proportion of their calories coming from protein as opposed to fat, and they don't feel as well. They feel more tired, and they're generally the ones that kind of go off the carnivore diet. They'll say, "Well, I just wasn't really feeling. I wasn't really feeling that great. I felt better for a while, and then I sort of started losing energy and so forth." And so I haven't looked in specifically as far as the studies are concerned, about specifically, eating too much protein though, as a proportion of calories.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree that protein, I mean, fat is essential. You have to have enough
Mm.
fat, and I don't go long periods of time eating without fat. I mean, even in my leanest days, I'm still getting 30% of my calories are coming from fat, and then I'll have days every 3 to 7 days where I'll eat a boatload of fat. But what about, so let's talk a little bit about the brain stuff, because I think that's fascinating. Now, you mentioned setting up an Alzheimer's thing. I know Dale Brett is in out of, I think he's out of UCS, has done some work on ketogenic tests. Oh, this one thing I wanted to bring up, I just read a book that Johnny Bowden and Dr. Steven Sinatra sent me kind of a pre-release copy. They wanted me to review that, and they talk about, saturated fat, but it's not just saturated fat. I mean, we have all of these different types of saturated fat. Not all saturated. You just can't say all saturated fat. You've got oleic acids, palmitic acids, stearic acids. You've got medium chain triglycerides. You have short chain fatty acids rather. So is there? I mean, can we start to say that maybe it's different components of saturated fat that have an issue, or if these sort of all saturated fat is good, all saturated fat is bad. you know, I just find there's much more subtlety there the more you kind of go onto this stuff and see. And so have you looked into the different types of saturated fat as they impact brain function and health?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree that fat is not fat is not fat, and we lump these things in categories: saturated fat, unsaturated, polyunsaturated, and so forth. But they're all different. They're all fundamentally different. And you look at different sorts of avocado and coconut oil, and they would have different proportions of saturated fats and unsaturated and so forth. So you can't. It's not just one or the other is good or bad. As far as the brain, generally the brain is made of different sorts of fats, but a lot of them are these very long chain fatty acids, 20 and 22 chain fatty acids. That you don't really make them very well yourself. We do need them from a dietary source, and they don't really exist in plants. We can't really make them too well from smaller ones. You get them from there's longer chain fatty acids in different plants, but they're not too abundant. And we're not great at turning them into the larger fats that we want. So those seem to be very important. We have DHA. This is a large proportion of the physical structure of your brain is fat, so around 70%. About 20% of that is DHA. So this doesn't exist in plants. We don't really make it, and so you need to get that from animal sources. What we call this is why for the last several decades we've called fish brain food, right? Because it has a lot of this stuff, and so this is good for your brain. So your brain is made out of. I remember seeing just a talk, sort of a study looking at all the different sorts of, to grow this big brain, we need all these sorts of different fats, and from this we'd have to get it from this source and from this source and this from this source. And it's like, well, we have to eat all these different sorts of nutrition sources just to get what we need to grow our brain. And it's just like, well, but there's one source that definitely has everything you need to grow a brain, and that's brain, right? It's obviously going to have the different nutrients that you need to grow a brain. And we see this in the fossil records. Our prehistoric, way distant ancestors, before the worked stone tools came about, there's evidence that they were using big stones as pound stones to go after carrion animals and crack open their skull and get at the brains, and that this was quite beneficial to us nutritionally. So from an Alzheimer's perspective and a brain development perspective for children, and especially fetuses and young children, you do need these dietary very long chain fatty acids that we need from a nutritional source. We don't really make them that well. I'm sure some people are better than other people, but you do need a certain percentage of these things from dietary sources. So as far as as far as specifically which ones are going to be much more beneficial, I mean, it's certainly DHA plays a big part of that, as well as these very long chain fatty acids, all of which coming down just to brass tacks, do come from animal sources. You don't really get them from plant sources.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, I think looking at the requirements, ALA is a required, and then the DHA, EPA, which can be converted, but it's hard to do, and so it's better to make it from a dietary source. And I absolutely agree that the reason we developed the huge brain we have was access to high quality, high energy dense food, i.e., animal fat. There's no doubt about it. We can go from 300 cc to a Neanderthal who topped out at a 1700 cc. Most people don't realize Neanderthals actually had larger brains than modern Homo sapiens do. And that would have been done through constant chronic access to these foods, not feast or famine situations, which is the other thing that people assume people are always starving. I disagree. I think we kill big elephants. We ate them till we were full, and then we kill another one because they were ubiquitous and we were good at doing that. So I don't think we starve much. Let's go back to the plant toxin thing, because I know you've done a lot of research and looked at that. People, where do you find the big, because not everybody's on a carnivore diet and not everybody is sick. And so we have some people that thrive on diets that include lots of plants on them. They live a long time. They're absent of disease. Which types of, is there some sort of like, these are the big offenders for most people? And is there some sort of ones that aren't as toxic as others in your experience, or have you seen any evidence of that, or have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think a number one would be sugar. In a lot of these sort of populations, and with different sorts of diets, and people doing very, very well on polar opposite sort of diets. Generally, the commonality is that you'll see a lot less sugar consumption, or even no sugar consumption. So I think that's the main offender. Obviously, fructose, which is the sweet part of sugar, this is chemically addictive. It gives a dopamine signal to your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines actually kill those same areas of your brain as well, quite extensively. There's been MRI studies showing this. And so, the fructose is metabolized in the same way as, it's fermented into alcohol by yeast, and our bodies actually do finish that fermentation process in a sense and continue breaking that down in the same pathway. So you do get the same byproducts of breakdown from fructose and ethanol. So, you get this, is shown biochemically by Lustig back in 2009, that this causes the same sorts of disease processes to happen, such as fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, so forth. And so that is absolutely number one to get out of your system. The different plants, I'd say carbohydrates are second on that list. They fundamentally change your metabolism. They change their signaling structure of your hormones. Your blood sugar itself is toxic. Your body is protective of this, and so it raises your insulin to protect this because it is damaging you. So what kills diabetics, is the high blood sugar itself. And so insulin blocks leptin, which is a signaling protein or a signaling hormone to your brain that shows, your brain how much, fat you have is produced by your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, and tells your brain how much fat you have, how much energy you have. It's just like running gas gauge. Okay. So when you block that, it looks like you're running on E the whole time. So your brain thinks you're chronically hungry. So you keep eating, and it does a lot of other sorts of things as well. But it's that's a fundamental one. After that, there are certainly vegetables and plants that cause different harm. We know this intuitively. You get lost out in the woods and you run out of food. You can't just eat any plant. Most of them will kill you or make you horribly sick. Okay. So, just because, we call something a vegetable doesn't mean that they don't still fall into that category. Now they're going to be different, to varying degrees. These things are going to be bad for you. Nightshades are, have been known for centuries, millennia, to be very, very toxic. We never ate them. And then we went to the New World and we found these, tomatoes and potatoes and, peppers and so forth. And they knew that these were nightshades by the leaves and whatever, however they were able to tell. But they brought them back as curiosities. They brought them back to Europe and said, "Oh, look at this interesting plant. Tomato is an interesting plant." It is. But they weren't eating them. But then they noticed people were eating them, but they were eating them a certain way. They blanch the skin and, blanch the tomato and take off the skin. They take out the seeds because, the barrier protection is going to have a lot of the poisons in them. The seeds, it's a plant's baby. Everything protects its baby more than anything. and a seed's a plant's baby. So that's where a high proportion of these toxins are. And so you take those out, you take the skin off, you're sort of mitigating it. And, you know, potatoes, we all know how to store these things. You have to keep them in the dark. If they are out in the sunlight and they get green, you have to throw them away. If they start growing a root, you have to cut that out, or you have to throw it away. 70 people a year die from eating potatoes, you know, I mean, potatoes, right? But that's because, you know, they do have these toxins in them all the time. They produce solanine, and this stuff is toxic. And in different, you know, at different times, in different ways of preparation, they're more toxic. But, you know, whether or not they kill you, they're not helping you. So, you know, they're going to cause issues in your body. They're going to cause quite a lot of inflammation and toxic effects. So I think sugar is number one, certainly. Carbohydrates would be second, and then nightshades would certainly be third. And, you know, trying to talk to people in clinically, I try to get them off sugar 100%. I try to get them off carbohydrates next. If they still want, love to get them doing carnivore. But if they're, you know, if they're against that and they want to eat vegetables, that's fine. But I'd try to get them to eliminate the nightshades as well. So you kind of do this in a stepwise sort of progression. But those are I think those key three that people should really work to get out of their system and feel quite a lot better.
Yeah, when you talk about sugar and then carbohydrates, and I mean, there are carbohydrates in tomatoes and nightshades and things like that. So I'm assuming you're referring to like starches and processed grains. Is that what you're referring to when you say carbohydrates?
Yeah, mostly. Yeah. Well, something that's going to have enough of a carbohydrate load to spark an insulin response.
So would that be like fruits and stuff like that, bananas and all those types of things, grapes, oranges? Is that part of that, or is that different?
Yeah, no, certainly. Yeah, certainly, because, you know, obviously these things contain fructose as well. Fructose would be, you know, the worst culprit in that mix. And so, you know, and that's hard for people because they say, well, I really enjoy fruit. And it's like, well, yeah, people like drugs. You know, these are addictive, you know, and they taste good. That's true. It's thought, actually something I saw on a side from Lustig's thought that, you know, evolutionarily why fructose tastes much sweeter than the other sugars is because we haven't found any plants that contain fructose that are acutely poisonous, that make you sick or die that day. And so we recognize this as a quick energy hit and something that was, you know, short term anyway, safe, and it refills your liver glycogen and so forth because of its breakdown. So potentially that could be why it's sweet and so forth. But we have to remember that this is benefiting the plant. They're getting animals addicted to this to move their seed. This helps the plant. This doesn't necessarily help us. So yeah, I would definitely include fruits in that.
You know, I mean, it's pretty clear human beings ate fruit, you know, throughout time. Primates, you know, obviously eat fruits. We arguably evolved from a common ancestor primate, for those that believe in evolutionary theory. And we do have some of the machinery to deal with that. Do you think it's more of a dose dependent thing? You know, like I said, most of the time fruit would be accessible to many people, depending on the part of the world, in limited times, limited quantities, and a small amount. You know, people make the argument of eat local seasonal foods that are available to you. And, you know, there might be an ancestral component. You know, obviously I am probably Northern European if we go back far enough. And so I probably would have had limited access to fruit, plenty of access to meat. What say you say it's dose dependent? And if you eat, you know, a handful of blueberries, you know, for a few months out of the year, no big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly dose dependent. If you know, the more you do, the more of these sorts of effects you're going to have. I think that there has been, you can argue, an evolutionary, you know, benefit of eating these things at certain times because it does give you a quick hit of energy. You do know this is safe. You're going around trying to eat things, you know, everything's tasting bitter. It's bitter. It's bitter. Like, oh, okay, what's that? That's not too bad. And then you recognize that, and that's something that you can survive on. And maybe people that recognize that as something that tasted okay, you know, survive more than other people. So I think there's certainly a benefit. You know, you look back, you know, we started out as sort of ice time people when the ice ages started. We were, living in the ice times. We were hunting these big mammoths and woolly sort of mammals and things like that. There wasn't much plant life to eat. I think that's what drove our final leg of evolution into what we are today. And, the fact that our ancestors became carnivores is why we are humans today. I think that you can also, during summer times, you can have fruit and enjoy fruit and so forth. And that's not necessarily going to hit you too hard. The Native Americans would sometimes they would make pemmican. They would run a buffalo herd off the cliff. They'd dry the meat. They'd mix it with fat, about 50-50 ratio. And that's generally what they'd eat throughout the year. So they, like you said, it wasn't, feast and fast. It was just feast. They had quite a lot of meat. Sometimes they would mix in blueberries and things like that, a small amount, but by and large, they ate just the meat, according to different sort of records. But there's also areas that, did have access to fruits, did have access to plants, and, didn't eat any of these things at all as recorded. So, I've been reading original source material of different explorers coming to America and to Australia. And all these people were marveling at the fact these people only ate meat. They had all these plants around, they just didn't touch it. And they were extremely healthy, extremely strong, lived, very long lives, and didn't get the diseases and the illnesses that the European sailors had. And there was an entire chapter in one of these books from this explorer back several hundred years ago from France, just marveling about this. And he set up strength tests with the different Aboriginal communities. Some couldn't get meat year round. Some did eat some plants. If they couldn't, get meat or whatever, they knew which plants that they could safely eat short term. But when they got meat, they ate meat. In certain places, like in Tasmania, there's certain tribes, they just ate mollusks. They ate abalone and crustaceans. And the French explorer says, we even offered them normal fish that we caught, and they're like, oh no, we don't want it. So they were even able to be selective in the particular type of meat they wanted. And they didn't eat any plants. And they found that these strength tests, as they describe, sort of lifting heavy things and so forth, that the Aboriginal communities that ate meat just year round, they were much stronger. And then the people that ate some plants throughout the year were just slightly less, and it went down through all the different sort of explorers from the different parts of the world. But you can certainly survive and even thrive with some of these things in your diet, but it's not optimal. It's not optimizing it. So you have to kind of make a distinction in your head. Do I want to be healthy and happy, or do I want to be as healthy as my body can be genetically? I opt for that. That's my personal choice. I don't begrudge anybody making any informed decision in their own lives, but that's the one that I like to do. If you eat some sugar, eat some plants every now and then, it's not going to kill you. I get some things mixed in with my food sometimes, and I feel the effects of it, and it's like, that's weird, but it does go away. And so that didn't really harm me. There's a gentleman from, this professor, I can't recall his name, but he does all this sort of research into, the different sorts of ways that plants defend themselves, going into the toxicity sort of things. And he would argue that, as long as you're eating very varied things, and you're not eating too much of one thing and getting this buildup of toxins, that it's actually, can be good for your body to kind of help stay tuned up and fighting these sorts of things off. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I don't think it's necessary. Hurting your body is capable of breaking down safely a certain amount of these sorts of things. As long as you don't overwhelm it, I think you'll be fine. I feel better when I don't touch it. But he was quite interesting, actually. He was talking about the various ways that plants defend themselves, and the various poisons that they were using specifically. Various ones use different chemicals that make you very photosensitive, so you burn very easily. There's apparently, I think, a chemical in celery that does this, and so there's an actual term they use called celery dermatitis. People that picked a lot of celery, handled celery, or ate a lot of celery, they'd have to wear like gloves, long sleeve shirts, hats, and a lot of sun cream, because they would absolutely just scorch themselves if they ever got out into the sun. This is a way of protecting itself. And there's different plants that do that. An animal gets caught out in a pasture, they run out of food, they start eating things, they get horrible blisters all over their face. Limes do that too. Just the oils on the skin of lime. Well, obviously, green lime is not ripe. It doesn't, the plant does not want, it wants you to move its seeds when it's ripe, but if it's not ripe, those seeds aren't ready yet. And so they don't want you to touch it. And so they have these oils in it, and they can soak into your skin and cause you to get second-degree burns. It actually happened to my little brother. He got into the lime tree when we were kids, and he's just covered in just welts and blisters. We thought he was having an anaphylactic reaction. It was like, okay, keep that kid away from limes. And then, when he was in college, I remember seeing him drinking a Corona with a lime in it. I was like, isn't that going to kill you? And he's like, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it doesn't work when it's in a Corona. So I was like, all right. And, but, thinking back is like, that's probably what happened to him. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting from that standpoint. But yeah, I think you could do anything in moderation, but I think you can also take that out to its logical extreme as well, or its absurd extreme, and the different sorts of things that you wouldn't, it wouldn't be anything in moderation, right? You wouldn't want lead poisoning in moderation. You wouldn't want genocide in moderation. Right? There's things that are just bad that you don't want anything to do with. So I try to limit those things. I'm sure that there are, certainly very healthy people that can live with some of this stuff in their life, but I don't think that they would be necessarily as healthy as they would be otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we look at populations that do have access to fruits and vegetables, the Sime, or I can't remember, the Bolivian tribe, they're surrounded by fruits and vegetables, yet they spend 6 hours a day hunting, because,
Yeah.
and we know that, when we look at like indigenous tropical people that are from tropical environments, many of them, because they probably would have chosen to eat fruits and vegetables. I mean, this is just eat what's available to you. Or fruit, certainly, they end up being smaller. I mean, if we look at, like these, if we look at the temperate, or the sort of the closer to the polar regions you get, the taller the population gets. And some of that, there's some thought that maybe dairy had to play a role in that. We look at some of the tallest people in the world, Northern Europeans, some of the Nilotic African tribes like Maasai and Dinka, and some of the other ones where they're very tall. So it's interesting. And I think health indicates population height indicates population nutrition. And so clearly, meat is a better source of nutrition. I have no doubt about that, for growth and performance and strength. That's sure, and for sure. But there is, a lot of people that will make the claim that, that's fine. It's good to have growth early on. Babies are on a high fat diet. They're on a high energy diet. They're growing the brain. That's why we have lots of saturated fat in the breast milk. And we also have lactose, because it's just energy, and it's going to convert into body fat, which will then help us fuel the brain, as these babies are spending the first 2 years of their life growing most of their brain. And then we know the brain grows till about age 25, or finishes maturing at 25. But then people start to say, well, once you reach physical maturity, sexual maturity, you've kind of, reproduced, then this sort of need for protein, animal fats is not good. And now we need to switch to a more sort of, for lack of a better term, plant-based approach, due to risks of premature aging. And I'll tell you, I'm not premature aging. I'm doing it the other way, in my view. I mean, I'm just looking at my own progress over the last decade. But nonetheless, there are people out there that claim that mTOR and IGF stimulation is going to cause us to age early, to die early, and get things like cancer. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to kind of, again, you can get, talking about mTOR, and you go like this, and they kind of look at these very interesting details, but they are details in a broader picture, and I think you can get lost in that. You can not see the forest for the trees, sort of thing. Why would we fundamentally change as a species because we're 35? Why would we fundamentally change our entire our dietary structure and our metabolism and ability to break down food in a certain fashion because we're, you know, we're 30 or something like that. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't see any example in nature where animals have, you know, very different, you know, niche eating habits throughout the course of their lifetime. You know, mammals, they drink milk, but you look at the components of milk, and what that means is very similar to what we'd find in fatty meat and so forth. I just don't see that. And I think, you know, people say, well, some things are better for different people. I was like, okay, well, name me one example in nature where you can find two members of the same species that have a different optimal diet. I certainly haven't seen any. And so I don't see why this would be a benefit of you when you're developing, but not about a benefit to you when you're developed. I just don't see that. And I don't see, you know, why is it something is, you know, we're developing our brain, we need certain nutrients, but our brain doesn't, once it's fully developed, it doesn't just stop there. It's not static. Okay. It continues to, you know, grow different pathways and different sorts of, you know, structural components. And it's like a gland or any muscle in your body. It responds to stresses. It responds to stimulus. And if you stimulate in a certain way, it's going to grow in a certain way. You need the building blocks to do that. You still need fat. You still need protein. You still need these things. You know, every minute that we're awake, we get low grade brain damage. That's why people that average less than 6 hours of sleep a night are 6 times more likely to get Alzheimer's. Okay. So sleep is getting workers to the job site. They're cleaning up the job site. They're getting work done, but you're not going to build a building if you don't have concrete. Okay. So if you don't have the fat, if you don't have the structural components of your brain, you know, you're going to continually slowly break down your brain. You're not going to rebuild it. This is where I think dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so forth come from. These just didn't happen in any real numbers prior to this massive switchover when we started saying fat's really bad for you, cholesterol is really bad for you. So I think that that these people can make very good arguments and very reasonable arguments. But I think there are also these things in medicine where they say, well, this makes sense because of these sorts of things. And people say, yeah, that sounds reasonable. And then it gets repeated so many times that it ends up in a textbook. But then you actually look at it and you actually do a real study and you find out, well, that's wrong, actually. You know, like the idea that, you know, more protein is going to destroy your kidneys. Okay, but that was something that has been repeated a lot. But then when you look at the studies, it actually doesn't show that. If you actually do study that. So I don't think there's any good evidence to say that, you know, we all of a sudden need, you know, go from carnivore to herbivore. I don't think there's any example in nature that does that. You know, we learned in, you know, 8th grade biology, animals have an evolved evolutionary niche. You know, this is what they eat. This is how they live. Okay. Why are we different? We're animals. You know, I don't think that we dropped out of here from space. I don't think we are separate from the animal kingdom. I think we're within the animal kingdom. And so I think those same rules apply. So, you know, I don't see how they hold water when you just look at it from a fundamental standpoint. You look at basic principles. Why would we work so entirely different than other animals? And, you know, and you know, the simple fact is that we have quite a lot of studies that show just the opposite. And you have people that, you know, get into their 40s and they say, well, you know, you need to stop eating meat. You have to stop eating fat. And so they do, and they go more plant-based, and they start getting a little more overweight, and they start feeling a little worse, and their blood pressure goes up and their cholesterol goes up, and all their different sorts of, you know, markers get worse. And their doctor telling them, well, this is because you've been eating those steaks for the last 20 years. You know, this has just been building up. But that doesn't really explain why you felt great those last 20 years and you started feeling bad now when you stopped eating those steaks. I don't think that really fits with the picture either. And, you know, we have clear evidence. We have people that, you know, were living to great ages, living at a primitive level with no modern medicine. You have to take their word for it, which a lot of people don't like to do. They say, like, well, these primitive cultures, they put a lot of weight and stake in old age, and so they're saying that they're much older. Okay, every primitive culture in every country on every continent who've never met each other, they've just all decided this is what they're going to do. Maybe, but I don't really believe that either. Um, so I don't see how that argument can really hold water if you know, scrutinize it to any degree.
Yeah, and I love the analogy about, the animals, because, you don't say lions are going to eat meat and zebras until they reach sexual maturity, and then all of a sudden they're munching on grass. It just doesn't happen. And I think it really points to the really just lack of quality in our ability. I mean, it's not that the researchers are bad people, but I think we just can't do the studies well in human beings, and it's just a limitation of nutrition science in human beings that we get these sort of assumptions and presumptions based on really contrived sort of scenarios, and lower animals, which it's just a very unsort of extrapolatable situation in my view. Anthony, it's been an hour, man. I know this has gone fast. You've got a lot to say. I just can you I know I see you on Facebook a little bit, although I really do Facebook because I just don't like the platform that much. But can you talk about where people can find out more about what you're doing, or is there a way to follow you and that sort of stuff?
I've kind of slipped off Facebook as well, but I'm still on there. It's Anthony Chaffee, and I'm on Instagram as well. It's just Anthony Chaffee MD, and I do post probably more things there. I am trying to get a website going called The Carnivore Life. It's in production, but I think that something I've been thinking about for a long time is going forward with these sorts of studies, and with just some writing up some thoughts and things like that, and then putting out some more research, and then sort of publishing it on that website. So that's going up. It should be up, but it doesn't really have much anything on it. So it's in production, but it's called thecarnivorelife.com. And that's pretty much it at the moment. And I'm just trying to sort of set up that platform, and then be able to kind of reach more people that way.
Well, good luck on navigating through the Australian medical system, and hopefully you'll get to where you need to be. And then, like I said, I think there's a huge need for lifestyle, both within and outside of the medical system. Like I said, my view as a medical system is fatally broken, and I'm not going to try to fix it from that side. I'm going to try to kind of work from the outside. But anyway, thanks again for coming, folks. Thanks for being here. I'll see some of you guys tomorrow. If not, have a great weekend and great Memorial Day. Get outside, get some sun, get some meat, get some exercise, continue to be positive role models for our community. All right, guys. Thank you very much. All right. Take care. Take care, Anthony. Bye-bye, guys.
Thanks, man. Good to see you.